My SF-181 experience with Chief Nanya Shabu El of the Atsi Hata Nation of Yamasee Moors by Robert C. Mac Jones, aka Nasir Salah. Being white, Robert Christopher Mac Jones, aka Nasir Salah Bey. I am white. White, a person having origins in any of the original people of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. The Atsik Hata Nation of Yamasee Moors is an indigenous, sovereign, and tribal nation as defined by Presidential Proclamation 7500 and recognized as such by the various instrumentalities of the United States, which includes the United States of America and whose land includes but is not limited to Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, and Tennessee. We are the indigenous peoples of the aforementioned lands with the geographical coordinates 33 degrees 36 north latitude, negative 84 degrees 17 west longitude. The 1715 Yamasee Uprising and the Trail of Tears is a historic event which has been acknowledged by the U.S. Congress, passing the following resolution HJR 3, HJR 194, and S-Con Res 26, in which the U.S. federal government, under the command of U.S. President Andrew Jackson, rounded up our people, be they Yamasee, Choctaw, Cherokee, Moor, Amalek, Seminole, Yuchi, Wichita, and forced them to walk west to Oklahoma away from their traditional lands, which were illegally and unlawfully usurped by the United States. Prior to the passing of the aforementioned U.S. congressional bills and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, our nation has had the most resistance from the United States of America, in exercising our right of self-determination. Despite the fact the United States of America has passed Presidential Executive Orders 13.10.7, Implementation of Human Rights Treaties, and the Presidential Proclamation PP 7500, guaranteeing our right to exercise our tribal sovereignty and self-determination. Known as the Dred Scott decision, which has never been overturned, has made it clear that no descendant of Africans can be citizens of the United States of America. This current state of affairs leaves those descendants of Africans/Moors who are unfamiliar with international law, the United Nations second decade of the world's indigenous peoples, and the fact that they can now self-identify themselves as indigenous or tribal, unable to have a nationality or the ability to identify and claim their indigenous heritage in accordance with House Joint Resolution 194.
The Dred Scott decision, which was handed down by the Supreme Court in 1857, is one of the most famous or infamous decisions in all of the history of the Supreme Court. And it arose out of some complicated issues, but what it basically had to do with was the power of Congress to prohibit slavery in the Western territories. Dred Scott had been brought as a slave into the territory of Wisconsin, where slavery had been barred by Congress. And later he sued for his freedom on the ground that he had been in a place where slavery had been abolished and therefore should be considered free. And this goes all the way up through various courts. And the Supreme Court eventually rules, no, Dred Scott's not free because two reasons. One, Congress does not have the right to prohibit slavery in the territories. And this basically declares the Republican Party unconstitutional. The Republican platform, Lincoln's platform, which is to prohibit slavery in the territories, the Supreme Court said you can't do that. Slavery has a right to go anywhere within the country in a territory, not a state. A state can abolish slavery. Illinois did. But the territories which belong to the whole country, slavery has a right to go there. The second principle put down by Chief Justice Taney in the Dred Scott decision was that blacks cannot be citizens of the United States. In a sense, Dred Scott can't even sue because he's not an American. This is one of the best examples of this notion of blacks as aliens. Even though he's born here and everything, he is not an American. The American family, as Taney says, is for white people. And in the most famous sentence in that decision, he says, a black man has no rights which a white man is bound to respect. Now, he's not saying blacks can be killed with impunity. What he's saying is, legally speaking, they are not part of the body politic. They are not part of the we the people that created the Constitution, and therefore they're just outside of the system. So they don't have any rights under the Constitution because the Constitution is for white people.
The Dred Scott decision of 1857, Jim Crow laws and Christian Black Codes, 1794. The legal limbo created by the Dred Scott, Jim Crow law, and the Christian Black Codes, which are still used today, put the descendants of Africans living in Africa in a stateless position. This has caused these descendants of Africans to rely on the United States courts, which have a history of biased judgment against Africans and Native Americans. Numerous African/Moor slaves were taken in as runaways from Europeans by Native/Indian tribes who accepted, protected, adopted, and married into Indian/Native tribes and became family and part of the Native/Indian tribes all over the United States of America. This would make the Africans/Moors and the Indians ethnically the same. House Joint Resolution 194 in the 110th Congress, first session on February 27, 2007. House Joint Resolution 194 in the 110th Congress, first session on February 27, 2007, acknowledges that African Americans were stripped of their names and heritage. All over America, many African Americans claim both African heritage and Indian. Many African American families have Indian roots in any one of the various tribes in America, such as Cherokee, Choctaw, Yamasee, Yuchi, Seminole, Wichita, Lumbee, and Cherokee, etc. On July 8, 2003, President George W. Bush acknowledged in a trip to Gore Island, Senegal, that slavery was one of the greatest crimes in history. The Committee to Rectify the Lingering Consequences. The U.S. House of Representatives expressed its commitment to rectify the lingering consequences of the misdeeds committed against African Americans under slavery and Jim Crow, and to stop the occurrence of human rights violations in the future. The Northwest Ordinance enacted by Congress in 1787, which begins with the phrase, "The utmost good faith shall always be observed towards the Indians." African Americans claiming their indigenous status. The United States of America / United States has consistently fought and resisted, to this day, African Americans claiming their indigenous status. We, from the Asik Nation of Yamasee Moors, in accordance with international law, have declared and proclaimed our indigenous rights. Our documentation has been legally recognized, acknowledged, certified, authenticated, and confirmed as correct. Yet, we still face persecution, apartheid, genocide, rape, and kidnapping for manifesting our indigenous rights as we are entitled to by law. It is well known that Africans in America who claim their indigenous status as Native American / Indian are subjected to persecution, ridicule, discrimination, genocide, abuse, and scorn, as if that is not possible, that they could be Native Americans / Indians. Yet modern history is now unearthing and uncovering facts to prove the assumptions by Americans to be contrary to the archaeological evidence. President Obama stated that he is not the first black president and that black has no standing at law on the Tom Joyner Morning Show. Conveniently, there is no record of Obama saying this on the radio show. The recording of the show was immediately removed from the station's website.
I am a black Egyptian. My father is much darker than I am. My mother is lighter than I am. In Egypt, people are identified by the religion first, not the race. So in Egypt, if you are Christian, you are a minority person. But if you're black, you're not a minority person. You are a part of the mainstream society. And I came from this background. And in Egypt, you identify as Arab and as Muslim. And in this country, when I first came, I identified myself as Arab American and Muslim first. And gradually, I became to identify myself as black. I came to the U.S. in 1978. And I became a U.S. citizen in 1985. When I became a U.S. resident, I was told by the Immigration and Naturalization that I am white. And I told them that I'm black, and they said, no, in this country, you are white. All Arabs in this country, all Arab immigrants are white. I didn't pay much attention in the beginning to this because in the Arab world, we identify with our ethnicity first as Arabs and then with the race second as black or white or whatever. But in this country, you identify with your racial group first and then with your ethnicity second. Gradually, I became black first and Arab second. And I rejected my white classification publicly for the first time in 1987, in February, as a panelist in a function sponsored by the Association of the Study of Black Life and History in Detroit. I said that I belong to two minority groups. I am Arab American and Black American, and I'm racially black and ethnically Egyptian. I was harassed by my employer right after that. I work for a white school district. The superintendent is white. All the associate superintendents are white, even though that we provide services to 30% black population. But the organization is white and the approach is very white. The attitude towards me changed completely after I went out publicly and rejected my white classification. One coworker came to me and told me, a white coworker came to me and told me right after the function that he met with the superintendent, and if I don't keep my mouth shut, my educational career is over. He said, you have nothing to do with these people. You have a history and a culture. These people came from the jungle. You have nothing to do with them. These people lie and steal. When I see one of them in my neighborhood, I call the police. And I was told by the director of general education, who is retired now, in 88, I was told by him that I get people angry when I say that I'm black Egyptian. If I just say that I'm Egyptian, I would get along. I have to add that I was denied promotion twice because I chose black classification. This is part of my 2 lawsuits against my employer, which are currently pending. 2 lawsuits. We don't have Egyptians of European descent in Egypt. We have a population which is basically the which is basically a mixture of ancient Egyptian blacks who intermarried with Arabs right after the Arab conquest. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black before the Arab conquest. But before the Arab conquest came the Greeks. It was the ancient Egyptian population was in Egypt for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black. And the Greeks came in 300 BC, and they started to intermarry with the local population. And then the Romans came and ruled from 70 BC until they were conquered by the Arabs and kicked out by the Arabs in the 7th century. And these people intermarried with the Egyptian Copts, and they made the pigmentation of the Egyptians, the Copts, much lighter because of this intermarriage with Europeans.
Now, you're an educator, okay? Now, how do you deal with situations when you practice your profession insofar as dealing with the mythology or the misconceptions about Egypt being a white civilization? How do you deal with that?
This is a big problem because Egypt, the ancient Egyptian civilization was a black civilization, and ancient Egyptians were black according to the Greek scholars and the Roman scholars. Ancient Egypt became white only in the 19th century and in the 20th century. And the scholar who is responsible for this is Seligman, the noted anthropologist from England, Seligman. White supremacy argues that blacks are inferior than white intellectually. They are subhuman and they are incapable of building a civilization. White supremacy had one dilemma until Seligman came. The dilemma was ancient Egypt was black according to the Greek and the Roman scholars. 10 of them said that, including Aristotle and Plato. 10 of them said that in writing. They had this dilemma. Ancient Egyptian was black. So if blacks are inferior intellectually and are incapable of building a civilization, how come the ancient Egyptians built a civilization? Seligman found the solution for this dilemma. He came up with a theory called the Hemite theory. He separated the blacks who built a civilization in Egypt and Ethiopia from the rest of the black race, and he called them brown-skinned whites, or the Hemites. So Seligman saved white supremacy from this dilemma, and all the white scholars followed him from that time on. This was at the end of the 19th century. And since that time, white scholarship says that ancient Egypt is white.
And just how far is this determined Egyptian willing to go to be classified black?
I want to carry my case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary.
Since 2008, all U.S. colleges and universities have known black has no standing at law. The Department of Education encourages institutions to allow current students and staff to re-identify their race and ethnicity. The U.S. Department of Education recently issued new procedures on maintaining, collecting, and reporting data on race and ethnicity for all colleges and universities in the country. These changes are being made in order to implement the Office of Management and Budget's 1997 standards for maintaining, collecting, and presenting federal data on race and ethnicity. The revised standards reflect a change in data collection policy and were designed so that federal agencies such as the U.S. Department of Education could all similarly collect information that reflects the increasing diversity of the United States population. Universities must meet these new Office of Management and Budget standards, but will be able to transition to them over a 2-year period. Thus, we have the option of reporting race and ethnicity to the U.S. Department of Education for its integrated post-secondary education data system. better known as iPads, under the old or revised formats during the 2008, 2009, and 2009-2010 academic years. However, by 2010-2011, all colleges and universities are required to report racial ethnic classification under the new format. Racial ethnic data is being collected in the following ways. Collect racial and ethnic data from all students, faculty, and staff through the administration of a two-question format. First question asks about ethnicity. Is the individual Hispanic or Latino? Yes or no? And the second question asks respondents to select their race from a list of racial categories. All respondents will have the opportunity to select more than one race, and those doing so will be reported in a generic two or more race category. Racial ethnic information on students comes from students' application. Undergraduate online applicants have already been changed to accommodate the fall 2008 entering class. Graduate admissions will implement changes to their collection format for the 2009-2010 incoming class. Racial ethnic data is being collected in the following ways. The federal guidelines strongly encourage but do not require a process that permits currently enrolled students to change their race, ethnicity according to a new collection format. Our tentative plan is to allow currently enrolled students to change their racial ethnic classification during the 2009 spring registration period, should they desire to do so. Faculty and staff must self-identify as to race, ethnicity upon hire. These data will be collected by University Human Resources. Data that include racial ethnicity characteristics of faculty and staff will be reported to the U.S. Department of Education via the IPEDS data collection system and is used in reports included in the university's affirmative action plans. Presently, University Human Resources is considering how best to implement the collection of racial ethnic data under the new guidelines. The revised racial ethnic categories will be integrated into the new HR data system that is part of the third RIAS implementation phase. Current faculty and staff will have the opportunity to re-identify under the new racial ethnic classification. Defining race and ethnicity data. To provide common language to promote uniformity and comparability for the collection and reporting of data on race and ethnicity. This standard is in compliance with the definitions and procedures included in the 1997 revision of the OMB Statistical Policy Directive Number 15 and the U.S. Department of Education final guidance on maintaining, collecting, and reporting racial and ethnic data to the Department of Education. Categories developed in 1997 by the Office of Management and Budget that are used to describe groups to which individuals belong, identify with, or belong in the eyes of the community. The categories do not denote scientific identification of anthropological origins. The designations are used to categorize U.S. citizens, resident aliens, and/or other eligible non-citizens. Individuals are asked to first designate ethnicity as Hispanic or Latino, or non-Hispanic or Latino, American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, or white. Standard Form 181. Ethnicity and race information is requested under the authority of 42 U.S.C. Section 2000E-16 and in compliance with the Office of Management and Budget's 1997 revisions to the standards for the classification of federal data on race and ethnicity. Providing this information is voluntary and has no impact on your employment status. But in the instance of missing information, your employing agency will attempt to identify your race and ethnicity by visual observation. This information is used as necessary to plan for equal employment opportunity throughout the federal government. It is also used by the U.S. Office of Personnel Management or employing agency maintaining the records to locate individuals for personal research or survey response and in the production of summary descriptive statistics and analytical studies in support of the function for which the records are collected and maintained or for related workforce studies. Standard Form 181. Social Security number is required under the authority of Executive Order 9397, which requires Social Security number to be used for the purpose of uniform, orderly administration of personal records. Providing this information is voluntary and failure to do so will have no effect on your employment status. If Social Security number is not provided, however, other agency source may be used to obtain it. Specific instruction. The two questions below are designed to identify your ethnicity and race. Regardless of your answer to question 1, go to question 2. Question 1. Are you Hispanic or Latino? Person of Cuban, Mexican, Puerto Rican, South or Central American, or the Spanish culture or origin regardless of race? Yes or no? Question 2. Please select the racial category or categories to which you most closely identify by placing an X in the appropriate box. Check as many as apply.